See, so that means the stream should pop up real soon, right? Come on, stream. There, we're live. All right. That is pretty low latency. I'm going to go ahead and tell the world. Streaming, game dev, building, missions, paste. And then over here. All right. So, we're still working on the mission thing, and what we're going to do today is we're going to get it to work. We've got most of it working, but there are still a couple of pieces that need to be fixed, and they were the same pieces that needed to be fixed last week. We did some juggling of the underlying code, but, we still got loads of stuff to do. Now that we've juggled the underlying code, hopefully it'll be easier to figure out what's going on here. So basically, the problem is that this is all temporary UI, obviously, but the problem is that as we go through the mission and start to try and track down the next mission element, it just stops. So the issue here is that it is not actually starting up the next scene. It says right here, start up the next scene, but that's an ancient debug statement that's not actually true. Great, I clicked off of it. Try that again. There we are. So here you can see it's under mission. It says start up next scene, and then it just says ready for next. This is something where the mission control is supposed to understand that the mission is done and we need to start up the next mission, but for some reason there's a break between the mission finishing and the mission control getting the message. And I think it's because the mission control gets called before the mission finishes. And the reason for that is that the actual challenge, because each mission is made up of challenges, each scene is made up of challenges, I think that what happens there is that propagates faster. The challenge goes, I'll set the mission control to do its next task, and then I'll tell this scene that I'm done. That's my guess. So let's go ahead and take a look and see whether or not that's true. Here's the challenge. So this is the order: mission control, mission scene, challenge. So the challenge then calls the mission. So if we take a look at the scene, here's the mission, scene completed. That gets called inside of the scene event. So we sign up for that, right? We're supposed to sign up for it. There it is. So here we sign up for it when we track down our scenes. We tell each and every scene that we're going to listen to them. I've got some comments. The Relin says, hey, feels like you went live a bit after you started talking, or did I miss the first few seconds? It's a low latency stream. I have no idea if that's screwing up the first couple seconds of the stream, but you didn't miss anything. All I said is that we're trying to do the mission stuff, and this is the stack. Mission control contains missions, contains scenes, contains challenges, and there's a break between the scene, the mission, and the mission control, where when a scene completes, the mission control doesn't know it, and that's what we're trying to fix. So we're just going through the chain. So as you can see, the mission signs up for uncompleted events. If we look over in the scene, the uncompleted events happen down here. Is it in the scene? Yeah, scene uncompleted. So if we go to that, it's right here. And when do we call it? We call it incomplete. When do we call complete? Find all references. Here it is, in next. So here's what's going on here. If we call next, then what normally happens is we go down and we find the next challenge, and then we sign up for listeners on that challenge. But if it's the final challenge, we don't do any of this because we don't have any of this. So I'm just trying to get the chain under control here because this is archaic code that I don't think we need to be like this. It's really, really dumb to set this up in a way that's complicated when I don't need it to be complicated. So I've got this mess here where all of these things are trying to do their best, and I don't need them to. All I need is to make this chain more transparent. So to reflect that, what we're going to do is we're going to rebuild it from the ground up. There are a couple of things here that I want to make sure that I don't screw up as I rebuild, but basically the concept of a next being separate from a challenge completed is not great. It kind of implies that there's something wrong going on here. One of the issues we've got is that when we add a challenge to the stack, we actually allow it to add multiple challenges, but that's obsolete. We no longer need it to do that because the mission control is responsible for adding challenges to the stack. The scene doesn't have any responsibility to control that anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to rebuild it so that the scene never actually creates the next challenge. Instead, the mission control does. So I'm just kind of in my head, I'm rewriting the whole scenario so that it's much more centralized and less scattered. The reason it's so scattered is because I had a completely different idea of how these missions were going to work, 2 months ago, and as a result, we've got something that is totally unsuited for the actual situation. So when it comes to the challenges, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that they can activate and deactivate, and then they got some helper functions, which we'll put in their own code region. The core functions here are activate, deactivate, and determine whether or not something was successful. That's pretty much it. What we then do is we communicate with whoever's listening via on deactivated, on success, and on failure. If we take a look, we call on deactivated here in deactivate. Do we ever call on success or on failure? We must. Here they are. They're up here. So here is a static function for applying a subsystem to any challenge that's listening. There it is. So what we've got is we've got a situation where the challenges actually keep track of all of the challenges that are currently in play. So the challenge class keeps a list of challenge objects. And what we're doing is we go through the entire stack and we apply them to every challenge that matches the type. So you can't submit multiple, you can't just aim at one particular challenge. If there are 3 engine challenges, then you can only submit one thing and it hits all 3, which is a core part of how this game works. So this is where we handle that, and we go through all of the challenges, and if the challenge isn't in the right type, if it's not the right icon, not the right system, then we just continue. I don't think we need to be briefed on that anymore. Only apply to challenges that match the system. Then we grab the success rate from the challenge in particular. And then what we need to do instead is not do any of this shit. So what we're going to do is invert this entire system. If they do match, we're going to apply subsystem to the individual challenge, like so. And that makes a lot more sense than whatever the heck we were doing here. So we're just going to delete this. Kaboom. And then what we'll have to do is create that apply subsystem function down here. So that's not going to be too challenging. We'll just put that at the end of activate and deactivate, I guess. Public void apply challenge, and that's going to be a module subsystem. We'll call it module. And since we're renaming things, we might as well rename it up here as well. Module. There we are. So now that we've got this, what we have to do is rewrite all of this to have the same functionality, but without any of the nonsense. So basically, we were doing a whole bunch of stuff where the challenge was getting referenced remotely. It was being referenced by the challenge class, but not by the challenge object. What we're going to do is we're going to bake that into the challenge object, clean it up a little bit. So we do want the success rate, which is easy enough. We just grab it. We don't need this anymore. There we go. And what we're going to want to do is determine whether or not we are going to be completed from this or not. Now, the difficulty here is simply that this is a for each, which is not what we want. Oh, it is. It's fine because we got the cache. So it's a cache. That's fine because we're going to start ripping that particular list apart as we complete challenges. We're going to remove them. So we don't want a for each that actually references the thing we're changing. But we're creating a shallow clone. So let's just mark that. Create a shallow clone so we can mess with the live list without screwing things up. And that also means that if a challenge is added to the stack, you're not going to have a problem where you apply a new thing to that challenge. You know, if a new engine challenge pops up, you want to get the chance to look at it before you apply whatever you are applying. So just the shallow clone is going to be important. So if we are ongoing, if we're not ongoing, so are we let's go ahead and reverse this because this is a shorter situation here. If ongoing, are we in a challenge that might not complete this submission? So if we're ongoing, then we only end when we have the right amount. So if success is greater than or equal to 0. Yes, that's right, because success rate actually bakes that in. This bakes in a change to our value if it's an ongoing challenge. So basically what we're doing is we're changing the success rate, then we're doing this bulletin board.say. So we're just going to delete the referencing here. There we go. So what we're doing is we're saying that we're successful, and then we're saying that we're completed. The completed comes second, and that's important because the oncompleted is when we do all of our juggling and tell the mission control that this particular challenge is over. So because of that, we're going to need to keep a close eye on the oncompleted here. But here's the thing. Deactivate gets called here. There it is. So if we take a look at deactivate, we just remove it from live, we disable it, and then we mark it as undeactivated. We need to be sure that undeactivated isn't what actually matters, to the point where we're going to go ahead and remove undeactivated. I think that is waiting for a disaster. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. And we're also going to go and return. So we're going to return regardless if it's ongoing, because if it's not greater than 0, we're just done. So that's fine. We're going to come back and ask you for something else later. So ongoing challenges do not trigger the next section of code. So for shallow challenges, we got something that's a little bit more basic. Single submission challenges. So if the success is greater than 0 and our victory briefing exists, then say our victory briefing. Here is the problem. This should not be here. This is really stupid. I don't know what idiot thought this was a good idea. So what we're going to do is, this is obviously, regardless of whether or not there is a victory briefing, we should mark it as a success. And I'm almost sure that this was what the problem was. We weren't firing off on successes because we didn't have a victory briefing. So here we're just going to say victory briefing dot. You know what we can do? We can just go over to bulletin board.say, and if there's nothing in it, we just don't say anything. There we go. So now we'll go back over to the challenge, and we don't need to worry about the victory briefing here. else if success is less than 0. We don't need the else if. We can just say else. Say the failure briefing and invoke the failure. Then we mark it complete, and then we deactivate it. So this is much simpler than the previous version. It's baked right into the object now rather than into the class, so we don't have to worry about dereferencing anything. And what we're going to do is go on over and connect the challenge not to the scene, but to mission control. The scene has to know whether or not a challenge was successful or failed, but not whether or not it's complete. The scene no longer controls what challenge happens next. So we come over to scene, and we take a look here. Basically, the reason that this scene has to know whether a challenge succeeded or failed is because the next challenge is going to be either on the success branch or the failure branch. So when we start to watch our scenes, so here we've got challenge completed versus next, and that's not what we want. What we really want to have happen is there shouldn't be a next. Next is no longer something we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to comment it out. I'll delete it once we're done with it, right? So challenge completed, on the other hand, is something that we do want. And what calls this? Find all references to challenge completed. Here's activate. We're going to go ahead and delete that. Yeah, this is old garbage. We don't want that anymore. Even if someone's using that, we want to change it. So the question is challenge completed ever being called? I don't think so. We're going to comment it out and see whether it's ever being called. So now that we've commented out all the functional stuff, let's see what sort of errors we get. There we are. That's what I had hoped. So here we've got this thing where it's asking whether or not we should have this apply subsystem. Did I spell it wrong? Apply challenge. I'm an idiot. We're going to call it apply module for reasons that should be frigging obvious. All right, so now we've got that. Let's go ahead and go back and see what sort of other errors we're going to get here. So here we've got on deactivated. So the challenge UI is waiting for on deactivated. Oh, I see what it was used for. It was a UI-based thing. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to add to the on completed instead of on deactivated. There's no difference, so we're not going to worry about it. The only problem is that on completed passes along something. What does it pass along? I think it passes along itself. Yeah, it's a challenge resolve event, so it passes along a challenge resolve challenge and integer. So we're just going to go ahead and have that self-destruct have a variant. Now the reason that we're putting it in as a variant rather than adding in null values here is because we want to be able to call this from a event without arguments, and for some reason the C# compiler doesn't let you do that even if you put in defaults. So putting in two functions, not a big deal. All right, so just happened to pop on over here. So right now what we're doing is we've got this context menu next firing up. This happens within the mission, and the mission goes and puts the next scene into the game, right? And this is... Let's comment it out. What we're doing right now is low stakes refactoring. We're just commenting out giant chunks of things because we're going to rebuild this entire chain. So this doesn't have an apply subsystem. I know it's called an apply module now. So here we are. So now we are into the mission control, and the mission control is what actually controls what sort of progression we're seeing. Here what we have is a situation where we're trying to get the active mission to activate the next scene. So basically there are two ways that we can activate a scene. One way is to call the mission.next, and one way is to call... No, they're both scene.nexts. Okay, so this is the scene. No? This is not. So there are two things we can do. We can either start up the next scene, or we can start up the next challenge. Let's go ahead and make that clear in the names of these, because obviously it's not working as intended. So public void next challenge. And we're also going to want public void next scene. And we'll go over to mission control, and we will make these real obvious. All right. So basically, we need scenes active, and if we've got scenes, we want challenges active. So right now we've got a problem where this gets called and then it returns if it finds a scene that it wants to fire next, and that's not what we want. We want it to continue, because next scene will no longer create a challenge. Next scene will only prep the next scene. We'll have to do the next challenges on our own. Now there are some problems with this particular progression in that it might call the wrong elements, the wrong challenges up at the wrong time, but we'll tackle that when we come to it. For now, what we want to make sure of is that next scene only creates the next scene. So bulletin board. Yeah, so there was a naming problem, a namespace problem with bulletin. For some reason, there is like a God mode super namespace bulletin in Unity, and I don't know why that is. So even when it's in its own namespace, I can't name things bulletin. So it's called bulletin. So what we're going to do now, and welcome Budore. What we're going to do now is we're going to just mark this as preps the next scene does not spawn challenges. So when we do the next scene, we're going to do ready for next equals false. And then we're going to do here. Just cut this and paste it, and then we'll delete the parts that we want to delete. So basically we're getting the next scene, and then what we're doing is we are getting it from either the failures or the successes, depending on whether we're failing or succeeding. The other thing we can do is we can create a next scene or current scene thing, which is what we'll do. We're not going to do it the way we just did it. Failures and successes, here they are. Public int length, public scene current. What we'll do is we will make that have a getter and a setter. And basically the getter, oh, well, there it is. It's called current scene. That, however, is not a getter or a setter. We'll go ahead and make it into one. So you can see that this can actually have any number of active scenes. Which was what I had intended to do differently back when. We no longer need that. But we do need this current scene to be a little bit cleverer. So what we're going to do is put in a get. If succeeding is greater than 0, then or greater than or equal to 0, return successes index. Else return failures index. You got to spell things right when you code. It's a little bit challenging. We're also going to want to put in a special case. If length, if index is greater than or equal to length, then return null. There we go. So now if we come down here, what we should be able to do is when we actually call next, all we really have to do is say index plus plus, at which point this here will happen automatically. And we don't need to do any of this. Oh, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll actually... so basically what we need to do is progress if there's no scene. So, yeah, this should work, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. All we do is we keep progressing. But here's the thing. We don't want it to work quite like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and embed it while there's no current scene. While there's no current scene, you want to index plus plus. But we also want to be sure that our index is not greater than our length. So if index is greater than or equal to length, then we're going to die. That's it. That's all we need to do. What we could do instead is like a loop while or something, but I'm going to go ahead and just do it like this. It's not complicated enough to worry about. So here we've got active scenes equals scenes.activate, blah, 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 blah. Here we are. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add to the current scene on completed, add listener, scene completed. And that should be all we need to do. So the big change here is that the index is now pointing at the scene we're currently at rather than the next scene. Shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, so that should work fine. I don't need any of this. And when we sign up for scene completed, that's what happens when the scene is done and we're ready to move on to the next one. We're actually not going to do any of this stuff. This is what we'll do. We'll add our succeeding in because we need that. And then we're going to go ahead and say ready for next equals true. We're not going to have to worry about any of the other stuff that we're trying to do. Ready for next equals true means that the scene is complete. And so it's important that we actually have a current scene. If ready for next, then return null. Because if we're ready for the next scene, then that scene is done and we're not worrying about it anymore. So now the scene does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. That's, unfair. What it does is it just compiles all of the success and failure ratings of the individual. The mission does nothing. The scene does a lot more. So now the mission just compiles all of the successes and failures of the individual scenes and just serves up the next scene when we're asking for it. It's a very, very basic class now, almost no code in it, just a couple of basic things about what's happening next. And so now what we need to do is go down to the scene and make the same sort of simplification. The next challenge pops up the next element. So pop up the next challenge in our challenge stack. And what we're going to do is basically all of this stuff, but it's going to be radically simplified. So let's go ahead and put it in. So ready for next equals false because we have an active challenge. Yeah, I guess that's still important. And then we're going to want to have, well, no, I don't think we want this ready for next stuff anymore, do we? No, we don't. We're going to delete it. So if index is greater than or equal to length, then we're done with the scene and we call complete. I believe that complete has been moved. There it is. It just completes. Okay, that's fine. And that's what we actually get. Oncompleted.invoke is what the mission watches for. So if we take a look where we sign up for it, uncompleted, scene completed. So that's the link there. When the scene completes, it calls the mission and says, I completed, please update your success rates. And then the mission goes, okay, fine. We're ready for the next scene, I guess. And it does nothing. It just sits there and says, which is great. That's exactly what we want. So here what we've got is when the scene is doing its next challenge, if we're done, we're done. and we just go off and die. No biggie. Die if we have to. Otherwise, we're looking for a challenge, and then here you can see we've got this if succeeding, if failing, and stuff. In the previous iteration on the mission, what we did is we said, well, we've just got one scene that's active. But a scene can have a lot of challenges active, so when we are trying to find the next challenge, we can't simply... can it have a next... I'm not sure whether or not a scene can have multiple challenges up at the same time. I don't think it can. I think it's the same situation that we had before. So let's go ahead and program it in the same way that we had before. We have to have active challenges, do we? I don't think we do. Yeah, we don't. Boom. Instead, we're just going to have a public challenge, current challenge, get. And then what we're going to want to do is... we are going to have a ready for next after all. I deleted it. Now I'm going to put it back in. So we're just going to go ahead and say that if there is an active challenge, sorry, I'm thinking about how to do this with the ease that we need, and I think that we're just going to have a current challenge. And basically, this is going to be current challenge. And then up here, we're going to kill it. There we are. This is a different way of doing it than the mission. Maybe I'll go back and change the mission over to this because it's a little bit cleaner. Yeah, let's do that before we forget. So rather than ready for next, what we need to have is a scene. Current scene, which we already have, so we'll just delete that. And then up here in the current scene, this is actually a function that we need to do. It has nothing to do with this stuff. It's not a getter or a setter. So we're just going to grab this and go on down into next scene and set it up. So current scene equals null. And then here we're going to do the index, blah, 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 blah. So while there's no current scene, we are going to do this computation. Well, if index is greater than length, return null, which is fine. We're going to just return. If succeeding is greater than 0, then current scene equals successes index. Otherwise, current scene equals failures index. And those can be null, so we need to be careful about that. And then basically, when there's no current scene, this goes inside the loop. There we are. Perfect. So as long as there's no current scene, we'll keep looping through this next scene loop until we find a scene that we can use. And if there is no scene that we can use, we'll die. If there is a scene we can use, we'll wait for it to be completed. Easy. Over here in the scene, yeah, that's fine. Over here in the scene, what we've got to do is the same. So we've got this current challenges, failures, successes, etc. We're going to actually have the exact same setup. So if there's no, while there's no current challenge, or current challenge equals null, they're equivalent in this particular situation, we're going to go ahead and paste that in there. If we're failing, then get the failure index. If we're succeeding, then get the success index. In this case, what we've done is we've said that if we're failing and there is a valid failure index. Whereas over here, we don't actually check for the valid failure index. So we're going to do that. I think that it's best to have it the same way both ways. So if succeeding is less than 0 and failure index exists, then fail. Otherwise, succeed. The logic is still the same other than that. Basically, we're saying that if there's nothing in the failure stack, then just flip to the success stack. Because otherwise we will end up just spooling to the end of the failure stack and skipping most of the mission, which would be a stupid thing to have happen. Right, so here we are. And I don't think we need the not equals null. I think that that's inherent in Unity. There we go. Oh, we need to increase our index, though, and then check it. If index is greater than or equal to length, then return. There we go. Perfect. And then down here, what we're going to do is we're going to want to create the challenge creator. The challenge UI creator create challenge returns a bunch of bull, which is no longer a factor. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to that and fix that so it doesn't return a bunch of bull. It doesn't have to. So here it is. We're just going to make it a void. We'll make it return a challenge UI. That makes sense, right? And here's create challenge, which we'll go over to. This returns a list of challenges when it should return just a challenge UI. There we go. So basically what happens is we get all of the challenges that are on the object because I thought that was clever at the time. I don't think I want to do it like that. So instead what we'll do is we will just use the one challenge that we've got. So challenge UI equals this. So challenge UI instantiate UI prefab challenge. Oh wait, is that correct? Just make sure here. No. Here it is. UI target equals challenge. Existing.add UI created.add. That part's not nothing. And then we're going to return the UI. Boom. So that should be fine. Yeah. And that means that we don't have to do this runaround. We can just say challenge UI creator create the challenge. And then we can say current challenge on completed add listener challenge completed. We don't currently have a challenge completed function because we commented it out. So we're just going to grab it. We'll just uncomment it out. It's probably 99% correct. There we go. So when we complete it, we're not going to be doing active challenges.remove challenge. We're going to be doing current challenge equals null. And then we're going to add in our success, and then we are going to do. This is probably a bad idea. So the bad idea here is that if we ever succeed, we switch over to being successful. So anytime you succeed, you're not just digging yourself out of the hole. You're magically teleporting out of the hole, which I think is a good way to do it. So I'm going to leave it. And then we are going to just take a quick little look up here. Next challenge. We don't want to call next challenge, but we want to make sure that we understand that the challenge is complete and our successes have changed. That's all good. The actual challenge itself is responsible for reporting the mission control. That is, it's got an event that mission control listens to. So we do not have to tell mission control. We do not have to tell anybody that the challenge completed because the challenge already tells everybody. We just have to do our thing first before the challenge tells everybody. And that is the part that was going wrong before. So challenge completed, this has to get called before the mission knows what's going on. So if we take a look, challenge on completed add listener, and here in the mission what we're doing is challenge on completed add listener. And that means that we can't guarantee which order these happen in. We have to do it very carefully. We have to make sure that this listener is added after our other listener. So when we create the next scene, that's the scene. That has nothing to do with, this is uncompleted for the challenge. And then we've got a challenge uncompleted. We sign up for something in this. next challenge. I don't think we do it in a moment. I think I deleted that. Okay, so we're gonna just have to keep an eye on that and make sure that it works, because this mission, this challenge on completed, has to fire off before we report back to home base. If we take a look at the challenge, it's got a couple of things. It's got an on completed, an on success, and an on failure. And it's only got one on completed, so that's what we're going to have to listen to over in mission control. And the idea here is that we have to do it after the mission gets popped up and processed. And what that means is that we call the next challenge operator before we sign up for it. And the next challenge operator has to return a challenge that we can sign up for. All right, so the only problem here is that if the next challenge actually, if we're done, then that can be a pretty bad situation, and that might be the problem that we were having, because here we're returning null, but we're also going to return null. Oh, that's the same thing. Okay, so if we return null, then the scene's over. Okay. I'm just processing this in my head, trying to get it to work in a simple fashion. And it may not seem simple because I've been talking through it really, really aggressively, but you will find that this progression is fairly easy to understand if I cover it from the top, because none of these classes actually do anything. So it's very easy to understand. The only hard part is that they have to not do things in the right order. Each class is only responsible for its own internal gibberish. It no longer propagates anything up or down the chain. The only thing that has that sort of capacity is mission control. And basically what happens is we call mission control with next, and then we try and find whether or not we have a scene active. And the way we try and determine whether or not there is a scene active is we ask it whether or not it has a scene active. There we are. So if there's no scene active, then start the next scene. Pretty basic, right? And what we're going to do next is we are going to take a look through all of the active scenes and see whether or not we can create another challenge. So we're looking through all the missions and we're adding them to the ready scene list. Okay, I see. So you're getting a list of all of the scenes that can be in this list. So what we'll do is mission no longer has any active scenes. We're just going to check whether or not the one scene that's active. So if mission.current scene, if there's not a mission with a current scene, then continue, because we're not going to be able to use it. Otherwise, if m.current scene current challenge. If there's no current challenge, ready m.current scene. Pretty basic, right? So basically, if there is a scene but there's no current challenge on the scene, then we need a current challenge. We need to set that up. And then here is where we do processing on that, which we're not ready to do. We haven't figured out the exact processing we want, which is why it's called dumb mode. But this actually passes back a mission. Or a challenge. So challenge ready challenge equals s.next challenge. And then what we're going to want to do is sign up for that challenge's event so that we can ready ourselves for a next when we want one. The other option is that we can have the challenges have a static event, which is probably a better idea. There are a couple of static things already here. For example, here in apply module. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a static event. So static public unity event. Actually, it's going to have to be a challenge resolve event. Is there just a challenge event? No, that's fine. And we're going to call this a global. No, we're just going to make it a unity event. Unity event. Module applied or challenge. Challenges faced. And then what we'll do is we'll put that at the end here. So challenges faced dot invoke. All right. So that will work whether or not anybody actually got challenged. So we're going to want to keep a track of whether or not anybody did. So int challenges faced equals 0. And then down here, we're just going to say challenges faced plus plus. And then down here, if challenges faced is greater than 0, then say that we faced some challenges. And this is going to be on challenges faced. Exciting. All right, so there we go. Now what we're doing is this happens after we finish applying all the modules, which means it happens after we finish doing everything else. And that means that over here on mission control, we'll sign up for that one thing, and we don't need to worry about this at all. So we'll just go ahead and let that hang. Returns a challenge that we don't care about, since we're listening for a static return. So here in start, we're going to want to set up our, there it is. We're going to want to set up our listening. So we'll just go ahead. Actually, we should do it in awake. So live equals this, and challenge dot on challenges faced dot add listener next. I'm not sure whether next won't work, so challenge faced. And then here we just say public void challenge faced. Oh, next will work because we're not actually getting a return, so we'll just call it next. And basically what that means is that every time we face a challenge, we're going to get more challenges. This will stack up forever, so we need to be a little bit careful about it. But let's see what sort of errors we're getting. The Relin says, what does continue do? Unfortunately, I don't know how much of a delay there is between what you're talking about and what I'm showing you, so I don't know which continue you're talking about. There are a lot of them. Also, I might not have noticed. Oh, don't need that anymore. Scene completed. Yeah, that's fine. So the command continue in general. Yeah, continue just goes to the next iteration. So if there's like 1 to 10, then and you say continue, it'll go from 1 to 2 and immediately restart the loop at 2, and then to 3 and immediately restart the loop at 3. So you don't have to worry about whatever code is between the continue and the end of the loop. It won't execute any of that. Continue can be dangerous, though, if you're using like a while loop, because you can just get stuck in an infinite loop. It's kind of obnoxious. All right, so what sort of errors do we have? Scene does not contain current challenge. It sure as fuck does. Okay, that was interesting. All right, so now in theory, things might work. Let's take a look. Do 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 do. Okay, so now it died. It didn't work. And it says passenger liner one way. Our final scene challenge is done. Moving to next scene. So we definitely still have the same issue we had before, but now that it's simplified, we should be able to track it down. It looks like what the problem might be is that there's some bullshit happening here. Come on, that one. There. Our final scene challenge is done. There, we're not moving to the next scene. We're just saying our final scene challenge is done. Over here in mission control, we're going to want this to happen next firing. And you can see that next firing doesn't happen here. There's no next firing. Let's uncollapse and see. Yeah, see, there's no next firing here. So there's something wrong where when the scene completes, the mission doesn't call home? That doesn't seem like it makes sense. All right, so let's go ahead and try it. We're just going to support ComDish, and you can see that ComDish is applied to mission, ComDish against one possible challenge, mission control next firing, the longest chain is ready for next, so starting that scene now, mission control next firing, sneaky spy, our final challenge scene is done. Our final scene challenge is done. So sneaky spy is set up incorrectly, which I'm sure isn't helping. If we take a look at sneaky spy, it shouldn't be. Sneak aboard. Oh, I forgot to autofill them. Yeah, for some reason this one wasn't autofilled. Still, let's try it. All right, so clear it out. Engineering. No, navigation. And then ComDishes. All right, so ComDishes applied to mission. Next firing. The longest chain is ready for next. Mission control next firing. Sneaky spy, our final challenge is done. What's going on here? All right, so it looks like what we've got is something happening here that we're not actually ready for yet. So longest chain is, and then we're going to pass it this. You know what? Let's make this a little simpler here. Mission longest equals this garbage. If there's no current scene, then longest chain is longest.name plus is in need of a scene. And then active missions, active mission.count next scene, so longest.next scene. Problem with this, as I understand it, is that what happens is this doesn't actually fire the first challenge in the scene. So what happens is we start up the scene, and then we come down here and we say next challenge. But the scene has an index of 0, and then what happens with next challenge? Index plus plus. See? So that problem is that while we're on challenge or index 0, we actually don't have the indexes set up correctly. We have a fence post bug. So what we'll do is we'll set them up correctly. Unfortunately for me, those are all saved, and they're all saved incorrectly. I don't even think they're showing. So I guess we can do it with like a start or an awake. It's garbage. Not a great way to approach it, but whatever. Huh, that was not what I wanted. Clear. Hit play. All right, so navigation and then clear. Let's try that command. There it is, power conduits. Power conduits applied to mission against one possible challenge. Mission control, next firing. Sneaky spy is in need of the scene. Mission control, next firing. Challenge deactivated. All right, this looks good. This looks good. And then we can hit ComDishes. And it says applying to 2 different challenges. Mission control, next firing. Mission control, next firing. Challenge deactivated. So we're getting several nexts firing here. I don't know what's firing them twice. Maybe I have something baked in here that's calling next more than I think. It's not causing an issue right now due to the structure of it, but I'd prefer it didn't just screw up all the time. Here, apply to mission module. Yeah, there's the problem. So we created an event that fires, and then we immediately ignored the fact that we've already set it up to actually work in a specific way that doesn't require an event. So we're going to just comment out this event, and I bet it'll still work fine. Yeah, let's try it. So we hit the boop, and then we go clear, and then we go boop. All right, you can see how only one next is getting fired on now, and that's correct. We only need the one next. Let's undock. Boop. Right. So what happened now is that we undocked, and that was the end of the scene. Which I don't think we're actually talking about anymore. I think we must have commented that out. Maybe. Let's see whether or not we can take a look here. Active missions, sneaky spy, passenger liner one way. So basically the dock to local station scene should be done. We're going to just go over here into debug. Index of -1. Huh. Here, this is the one that finished. Apparently, we have them in the wrong order. That's fine. We'll figure it out later. Here you can see that the index is 3, meaning that we're done, right? The successes and the failures, that we're done with them. And it means that we're done with our current challenge. So we do, in fact, know that this mission is done. Oh, good. They improved this. Nice. But for some reason, we didn't start up the next mission. And the reason for that is probably because this mission is too short. The other mission is longer. And we're trying to get the missions lined up so that they all end at the same time. However, dock to local station never fired. And I think it didn't fire because of the same reason that the scene's first mission never fired. And that is that our index is 0 when it should be -1. So to fix that, we're going to just select all of these missions and make that index -1. There we are. And that should work. Let's go ahead and see whether or not we get the dock to local station. Yeah, negotiate docking permissions. So when we negotiate the docking permissions, we then have the option. I got to change this scroll in the background there. That is just really, really obnoxious. But you can see how we're trying to get our stuff working, and then it just stops. And there's the problem right there. Next is getting called before the final scene challenge is complete. I'm not sure why that is. So scene completed gets called when the current scene's on complete gets called. On completed gets called when you call the current scene's complete. You call the current scene's complete when you are out of challenges on your index. So next challenge is what calls it. Okay, so there's the problem. Scene on completed is not something that gets called at the same time as everything else. It gets called the next time that the mission tries to call the scene. So you see how the next challenge is where it gets fired up? It needs to get fired up in the challenge completed as well. So that's what we'll do. The problem is that this is not guaranteed to trigger because it may be that there is a gap which has nothing at the end of it. And if that's the case, then this isn't going to work. So what we need is a specialized function to see whether or not there are any more challenges. So public void, are there any more, public bool, any more challenges. And what we're going to do is we're going to just take a look and see whether or not there are any further challenges in this scene. And the way we do that is we simply look ahead in the correct path and see whether there are. Now, if we take a look, we actually flip over to the success side if there's a failure on the, if there's no more stuff on the other side. So all we're really worried about is whether there are any successes left or we are failing and there are failures left. So if succeeding is less than 0, then we check the failure line. If for int a equals index plus 1, a is less than length, a plus plus. If failures, hold on, this isn't right, is it? Oh, this is obnoxious. So if there are any failures, if we're failing and there are more failures, then we return true. Otherwise, we do the exact same thing with successes. But here's the thing. If there is no failure, we break. Now, the reason for that is because it means that we're going to be swiping to the left over into the success column, and that means that whether or not there's more failures in the failure column doesn't matter. It's never going to come up again. So move to successes column if no failures. There they are. Return false. Now, I'm not sure why this A is green. That's kind of strange. Just checking to see whether or not there's a problem there. Unreachable code detected. Oh, I see. Because I put it in a for loop, but actually all we're doing is we're checking to see whether or not, well, first off, if index plus 1 equals length, then return false. Otherwise, just check the next. It's correct. It's perfectly correct. This is actually just failures index plus 1. Return true. So if we're succeeding, if we're not succeeding and there is a failure, then if we're failing, failure is our next challenge. If we're not failing or there are no more failures, see whether there's any more successes. Perfect. All right. So now that we've got that set up, it's all great, except we're not calling it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, if there's not any more challenges, then we want to call our whole scene complete. So we'll just stick that in here. Now where we had a complete, we're going to go ahead and barf. So debug.log error, failing out of next challenge when we shouldn't have. This shouldn't happen due to the any more challenges check when challenge is complete. And then here again, all right, so that should all have done fine. Let's check now and see whether or not it works. Let it grind, grind, grind. Hit play. I'm winding down for those of you who aren't used to my hour-long streams. So if you have any interest in asking questions, now would be a good time because I'm coming up on towards the end. I finally resolved this I think I finally resolved this just mess. I'm going to go ahead and refactor just the visual on this text pop-up, and then we'll be done. So we're just engines, security. Aha, good. It worked fine. We got the next mission popped up perfectly. We don't have any more command to submit. We don't have a next button yet. We'll have the next button soon, but first I want to fix this miserable pop-up. The bulletin board is just miserable. So the reason that it's like that is because the crew can take up the sides of the screen, but I think that it's not good. It's just bad. So if we take a look at what we've got, let's turn off the debug visual here. Can't see a thing. The actual content here is a vertical layout group where we allow the elements inside to set the height. And what we're going to do is we're going to just move the entire bulletin board. This is a canvas, so we're going to move this part. We're going to tie it to the lower left. And if it overlaps with the crew, we'll figure it out later. But more importantly, we're going to go into the bulletin board pop-up, and we're going to radically reduce the height, because that height was ridiculous. We're going to make it like 45. That's probably a little bit too small, but you know what? The text is too big. Here's the text. Font size of 20 for reasons unknown to me. That's still going to be a little bit too small, so let's just bring it up to 50. We could also just narrow the padding now that I'm thinking about it, because the padding is pretty aggressive. Yeah, see this? We'll make it into like 6, 6, 6, 6. That's more like it. So we'll just pop up our nav, tell it to dock. Not ideal, but better than it was. So now we'll just support. Okay, here we got a problem. So it's not as tall as it looks. We're going to go ahead and just bring this bottom down to 2 and see whether or not that's going to be enough to push it into readability. Command, support, and let's see here. Yeah, good. It's all good. All right, so now that works, and I think that we're done for the day. Next time, we'll do a lot of polishing. I'm not sure if I'm going to get stuff done off camera or not, but we'll see. The game needs to be turned into a game at this point. We're very close to the point where we can do that. This week-long... This is the problem with coding on stream only, because I don't actually do very much coding aside from this. It's a hobby that I only do 2 or 3 hours of a week. And that's the problem, because there are times when if you make a misstep, you've got to spend 3 hours fixing it, which is what I just spent a week doing, even though it wouldn't have taken a week if you were doing this as your day job. You just go back in and refactor it, and it'd be like a morning. And so that's why developing as a hobby with very few hours, and you're rigidly controlling how many hours you spend, is challenging, because any mistake you do takes a long time to undo. And I probably should have just sat down and fixed it off camera, but I didn't. Yay. Back to the grind next week with actual forward progress, I would hope.